If you want to be a successful trader and consistently successful, then you need to develop mind clarity. Mind clarity about the setup is extremely critical. And what is mind clarity? In your mind, you should be extremely clear. You have no doubts left, and you can completely articulate your setup. If that is possible, then it is easy to make money. If you are not very clear about your setup or what is really your setup idea, then you're not going to be buying at the right place, you're not going to put the stop properly, you're not going to make money. So, for whatever setup you select, develop extreme mind clarity. In order to develop extreme mind clarity for a setup, you need to first have a very clearly defined setup and reflect on that setup. Reflection creates mind clarity. Reflection really allows us to overcome our doubts. Like, I'm very clear about what kind of a setup I'm trading. I trade a momentum burst, which is a short term 3 to 5 days kind of a move, kind of a setup. So if I see a setup, I'm looking at it at a 3 day, and I always buy at the beginning of the setups. So let's say if I have to show you on TC 2000 a short setup, I'm looking at a short setup or as a momentum burst. So this is where I would look for it as a 3 to 5 days move. In 3 to 5 days, the stock makes 16-17% move. Another place to short will be here. And in this particular case, when you are looking at this, again, it's a 3 day. Sometimes you're going to make more money, sometimes you're not going to make enough money. So this is again a range expansion, or this is a momentum burst. Suddenly the market didn't have a momentum to the downside. 4 days it was just going sideways, sudden momentum to the downside, and then from there stock went down. Similarly, if you're looking for the positive side, like a bullish momentum burst, here is an example of a bullish momentum burst which happened recently here. This stock had this breakout, right? And it did go up 3 days. Today morning it gapped up and then it reversed, right? In 3 days, the stock, depending on where you bought, in just 2 or 3 days, the stock made a 9% move or 10% move. Now this is again a momentum burst where there was a clear momentum burst. Suddenly the momentum for the stock was higher, and for 3 to 5 days it went up. So my setup idea is very clear. I can explain to you anytime if you wake me up in the middle of the night. Same way, whatever setup you're trading, if you can clearly develop mind clarity for that setup in terms of, I know very clearly if I'm entering a setup like this, I'm looking for an exit on the 3rd day, because most of the setups, especially in this market conditions, are working for 3 to 4 days, right? So if I'm looking for a setup, that setup is likely to work only for, sometimes the setup is going to work only for just 2 or 3 candles, 2 or 3 days, right? And here the setup worked for 3 or 4 days, right? This one is just like a paused immediately. So that itself tells you that, look, this momentum should have continued, right? And it is not continuing. So that kind of a mind clarity is what is required for you to make money. If you develop that mind clarity, then what happens is you don't have doubts, you don't have confidence problem, you don't have a problem of FOMO, because you're very clear where you're going to be entering. Similarly, on an episodic pivot, I have very clear mind clarity. What is an episodic pivot? Which are good episodic pivot, which episodic pivot I should enter and which I should not even try entering, and how should I enter, where should I exit, what is the likely magnitude of a movement, magnitude of an episodic pivot. Now all these kind of things, developing a clear mind clarity is the essential thing for becoming a successful trader. Whenever you talk to traders who are new or who are struggling, they cannot articulate their setup. They don't have a really defined way in their mind of thinking through a setup. And once you develop that ability to clearly understand your own setup, is when the execution becomes flawless. That's when you don't make mistakes. That's when you don't buy a stock which is a 4 or 5 days in a row. That is when you know where to put your stop. That is when you already answered for yourself the question, how am I going to enter? Am I going to enter an anticipation setup after it confirms, or am I going to enter before it confirms? what kind of an order I am going to enter with, where am I going to exit. If, and there are, in mind clarity, there are if scenarios. If I enter a setup and then it fails to follow through, then what am I going to do? Am I going to continue in a trade like this? Am I going to continue in a trade like this, or am I going to abandon the trade? Right? If a trade setup is up 3 days in a row and like 2 days in a row, good momentum, third day it gaps up, what am I going to do? That question has to be answered before you enter a setup. So these kind of mind clarity issues, the more you spend time developing that mind clarity, then you will see that the setup becomes part of your way of thinking. You can find that setup, you can enter, you can exit, and you can make money from it. So if you do not have mind clarity about your setup, try and develop mind clarity by writing down your setup, by trying to explain it to others. By trying to explain it to others, it becomes even more clearer to you, because if you cannot explain it to your boyfriend, or if you cannot explain it to your dog, or you cannot explain it to a 10-year-old, that means you are not very clear about your setup. So try and develop setup clarity by writing about it, or by explaining to others, or by going through hundreds of them. And once you have mind clarity, you are very clear in terms of how quickly you will be able to react to your setup, and how quickly you will be able to get in, how quickly you will have if scenarios. If this happens, this is what I'm going to do. If this happens, what am I going to do? Because this is a field where there are no absolute answers, right? Once you enter a trade, there are many things which can happen. Either it can keep on going up, then if that happens, what are you going to do? If it gaps up tomorrow, if I enter a setup and tomorrow it gaps up 10% or 20%, that if is important. Then if that happens, what am I going to do? If it doesn't start going up and it doesn't follow through, what am I going to do? Am I going to wait for my stop to be hit, or am I going to get out of that trade and enter into another trade? Always the if is important. If you're not thought through the if, then you'll continue. This is a setup which I entered on this day, right? And my stop was very close, because if it had to work, it would have worked like this. That's the reason why I entered this setup, right? Now, if you are not thought through that situation, you'll still be holding a setup like this. So the if scenarios for every setup, and especially when you're looking at like in a market where there are many possibilities, because there are many players, there are different look at the same setup, and it might be long for you. Somebody might look at it as a short, somebody might look at it as something they are going to fade. So as a result, the if scenarios become important. This is part of developing a mind clarity. And the more you develop mind clarity, easier your trading will happen. More problems which people define as like, say, problems of psychology become less and less as we understand our own setups and variations of the setups. And if this happens, that happens kind of conditions, then we are ready for anything. And as the mind clarity becomes more developed, the setup becomes more easy to trade. So first thing, if you want to develop a consistently profitable and highly profitable way of trading, is to work on your mind clarity. And in order to develop mind clarity, the techniques are simple. The techniques are just narrow down a setup, look at variations of the setup, look at if this is what happens, how am I going to enter? If this is what happens after I enter, what is going to happen? If this is what happens after I second day, what is it that I'm going to do? If this is what happens. So the ifs is what creates mind clarity. And mind clarity is extremely important for successful trading.